Someone has obviously overwritten someone else's initials and did a pretty crude job of it. When Nurse Bell was interviewed by the ARRB, they asked if she recognized her initials on this envelope. This is from her recorded interview.
At the bottom half of the envelope, there are many initials. Do you see your initials anywhere around it?
No.
I have another version of this.
I see my name over here, and that's...
yes.
But...
on the line that says nurses.
I don't see my initial on that.
Keep in mind that not only did Nurse Bell state that she initialed the envelope, but she had to have initialed it, or none of the authorities from any of the agencies would have accepted it. And obviously this crude forgery was not written by her. In fact, if we bring up the contrast a bit, it's easy to see that other characters have been erased. And finally, if we look at the handwriting in the upper part of the envelope, we see that everything is quite consistent and obviously by the same person. But look at the difference between this handwriting and this. They were clearly written by two different people, which suggests that the right arm location was added later. Furthermore, Nurse Audrey Bell has always been adamant that she turned the wrist fragments over to plainclothes officers, but no one was in his Texas Rangers uniform that day, and Stinson was wearing scrubs because he'd been in the operating room with Governor Connally. This is from her interview with the ARRB.
What is it that makes you think that it was the Secret Service or the FBI? Is there anything special?
Yeah, I think they identified themselves, but I just don't. I know it wasn't to the Dallas Police or the county sheriffs or the Texas Rangers.
Okay. Well,
so it had to be. I feel it had to be a federal because they were in street clothes. They were not in uniform.
The simple facts are that every one of the four men who examined the Tomlinson bullet before it went to the FBI refused to confirm that CE 399 was the same one. And if that isn't enough, we have the governor of Texas, the Dallas district attorney, one nurse, one Texas highway patrolman, and Governor Connally's top aide, all confirming that the real bullet was recovered in his room and could not have been the one that Tomlinson found. And that makes sense because Tomlinson himself stated that he found the bullet on someone else's stretcher. I just don't know how the evidence could be any clearer. Now, I'm sure that some of you are also thinking that Dr. Vincent Gwynn, who testified before the HSCA, stated that fragments from Governor Connally's wrist matched the ammunition used in Oswald's rifle. But consider this part of Dr. Gwynn's testimony. The pieces that were brought up from the archives, which reportedly, according to Mr. Gear, were the only bullet-lead fragments from this case still present in the archives, did not include any of the specific little pieces that the FBI had analyzed. Presumably those are in existence somewhere. I'm sure nobody threw them out, but where they are, I have no idea. The simple fact is that if those fragments were from a different kind of bullet than Oswald's, the FBI could not allow Gwynn or anyone else to examine the originals. And it appears that that's exactly what happened. But let's get back to Dealey Plaza. Unlike the previous shots, the next one was extremely loud, and it was heard by everyone. It was first discovered by Dr. Louis Alvarez, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who was also a consultant for Bell and Howell, the company that built Abraham Zapruder's camera. Alvarez had worked with a documentary filmmaker in Africa who was having problems when the big game hunters they were filming fired their rifles, causing parts of the film to be blurred. He learned that this never happened when the camera was on a tripod, only when it was in the hands of a cameraman. What he discovered was the loud noise of the gunshots provoked involuntary startle reactions, which caused the operator to blur frames in a distinct and identifiable pattern. Alvarez later patented a device for Bell and Howell to eliminate this problem. Alvarez applied what he had learned to a study of the Zapruder film and submitted a paper on the subject in 1976 to the American Journal of Physics. In it he reported that there was a loud noise at precisely frame 285, which caused Zapruder to blur a series of frames which began 1/3 of a second later at frame 291. He concluded that that same noise startled Bill Greer, the driver of the limousine, and caused him to inadvertently slow the limo. But in his paper, Alvarez set what he called a boundary condition. The gunshots had to have been at least 2.3 seconds apart, since that was the shortest time in which the FBI could reload Oswald's rifle and acquire their target. But a gunshot at frame 285 would only have left a sniper 1.5 seconds to get off the fatal headshot that followed. So as a staunch Warren Commission defender, Alvarez speculated that perhaps a siren had gone off then, in spite of the fact that no witnesses recalled hearing the siren until after the shooting had ended. Perhaps it was because he was only looking at still frames from the film that Alvarez didn't realize that Greer and Zapruder were not the only ones to be startled by that noise. In fact, every non-victim in that limousine reacted in almost perfect unison with Zapruder's reaction. Mrs. Nellie Connolly was sitting in the jump seat next to her husband that day. Her testimony that her husband was wounded sometime after the president has been frequently cited by critics as a refutation to the single bullet theory.
I heard that noise, and we'd had so many noises with motorcycles and all that, that I thought. But I looked back at the president, and I saw his hands fly up to his face, and then he just sunk down in the car. Said nothing, did nothing. His eyes looked strange, but I knew then that he had been hit. John, sitting in front of the president, knew it was a shot because he shoots. And he turned to the right and couldn't see him, flipped around to the left and couldn't see him. He said, no, 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 because he knew that's what happened. Right. On the back turn, about halfway, John was just about halfway back, came the second shot that hit John.
But Governor Connolly contradicted his wife's statement that she thought he was hit after he shouted, "Oh, no, no, no." He, in fact, remembered shouting after he was hit. But during that time, she could only see her husband's back, and like Governor Connolly, she never heard the shot that actually hit him. Mrs. Connolly testified that when she heard that shot, she immediately turned to her husband and pulled him down and back to her. We can see her do exactly that within a fraction of a second following frame 285. While Mrs. Connolly was mainly focused on the president, Mrs. Kennedy's attention had been drawn to Governor Connolly, who had begun to shout. But she then heard a gunshot which caused her to turn back to her right and toward her own husband, thinking that he was receiving a bullet. That could only have been the same shot that Mrs. Connolly heard. But the wives were not the only ones to react to that gunshot. Watch Bill Greer spin around so fast that some theorists thought his turn was humanly impossible. Greer also testified that he felt what he called a concussion from that shot, which could only have been the shock wave of the passing bullet. Roy Kellerman's reaction was probably the most definitive. Watch the blow-up of him dropping his head as he raises his left hand to shield his ear. Counting Zapruder, 5 people reacted to that gunshot, all beginning within the same 1/6 of a second of one another, and each of their testimonies were consistent with a shot at frame 285.